given 7 trumpets. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And there was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense which came up with the prayers of the saints ascended before God.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Continuing in Book of Revelation, chapter 8. Here we encounter the final seal. The 7th seal. The book is sealed with 7 seals. And the way this is set up is a lot of people will picture the seals opening into the trumpets, and the trumpets opening into the bowls like a blossoming, thing. Like the 7th seal is the 7th trumpet, or the 7 trumpets. I think that might hold for the seals. That you could sort of see the 7 trumpets held within the 7 seals. But as long as you understand that that's not really a sequence. Because in the 6th seal is contained the day of God's wrath. And the trumpets are not God's wrath. God's wrath is sort of summed up in the 7 bowls, the 7 vials, chapter 16. So, you got to be a little bit, sometimes it's easy to get carried away. Lately someone in my email has been just sending me charts and charts and charts of they're just all this stuff and highlighted and stuff. And, when I look at this stuff, I'm like, I look at it and I think, early on an assumption was made, an error was made early, and they built on that. That's why it says, no other foundation can be laid than that which is laid, which is our Lord Jesus Christ. And every man should take heed how he builds on that foundation. And whenever you come up with theories and prophecy and all that, you got to be careful how you begin, because if you get it wrong from the beginning, everything that follows is going to be screwed up, at least as a complete picture. I mean, you may have individual elements that are correct, but it is highly likely to end up with a really messed up conclusion. Anyways, so when he had opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven about the space of a half an hour. I'm sorry about the late start. Yeah. And when he had opened the 7th seal, I read that. All right. The silence about a space of a half an hour. The consideration when you think okay, the 7 seals, the 7th seal is the 7 trumpets. If you say that, then you got to not base that on the chapter division and some other thing. The silence sort of, to me, almost makes a bracket. And people have often tried to read into the silence something. And of course, silence has meaning. In the midst of things. Sometimes nothing is nothing, right? But when you walk into a forest, right, you ever have that feeling that it's too quiet? I've seen that, that trope comes up in movies, right, where they say it's quiet. Too quiet. Because perhaps there should be noises, right? You hear the absence of things, like there are no birds. There's no wind. There's no sounds. It's silent. You know, for all this time we have all the voices and thunderings and all the about the throne and all that. And now just a half hour of silence. That's stunning in the midst of what was going on. Now, if we do connect the seals with the trumpets, that is an interesting thing, that before the trumpets we have a half hour of silence. And maybe it has something to do with the silence of heaven. You know, because there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. I don't know. Maybe that's... Well, here's another look at it. You know, the great day of God's wrath has come, right? You look at the final events of Revelation. You know, the two witnesses are slain. 3 days later they rise. Everyone becomes afraid. And I think the seventh seal may indicate sort of like that anticipation cooking for about a good half hour. You know, put oven to 400 degrees and bake for half an hour. I mean, heaven does not immediately respond. The two witnesses rise, and then a half hour goes by where everyone is free to freak out and pray for the mountains to fall on them, and to just try to hide, you know, give them a moment to be afraid, to hide themselves in corners and weep and to grind their teeth and to, you know, utterly lose it. Must be cloudy out. I guess it is. My thing keeps connecting and reconnecting. If there's a problem with the stream, you know, I can always... I'm recording this, so if it doesn't go up right, I will definitely... Anyone could tell me about it or whatever. I will upload a complete version. But as long as this tells me it reconnects successfully, I'll continue. Oh, okay, I saw the 7 angels which stood before God. I don't want to say anything more about the silence. Is there anything more to say? Of course there is. There's always more to say. But will we leave it there? Well, let's just go on and maybe something will occur to me. But there's definitely ways in which silence can be interpreted. And I think that, you know, anyone might have a great idea. But even when I put out an idea, like I say about this, I put out an idea for interpreting it, but it's not all clear to me that any one of those is exactly correct. But it's one of those things that you may recognize when you get to that point. Now, if the trumpets... Well, like I said, the seals I do not see as a sequence of events, but rather the opening of the information about events. And in the seventh seal, we have the opening of the... You could say it is the information about these trumpets, if you want to connect them, and that's fine. Trumpets are important information. The trumpets are essentially a list of signals, because that's what a trumpet is. I've discussed this many times, and I think it's an essential thing. You have to understand what the thing is. You know, just like the bowls or the vials of wrath are containers. They hold something. The seals are sealed. They seal in information. They prevent prying eyes from getting at information. They're meant to hold shut a message of whatever. A trumpet is a public signal. The only limiting factor, let's say, is that if you don't understand the signal's meaning, it's not going to inform you of anything. And I often use the signals they used in the military, like with bugles and such, for things like revelry, taps, for sounding the charge, for sounding the retreat. They use a trumpet signal that could be heard over the din of the battle, so that the warriors would clearly understand what was going on and what they were supposed to be doing. I see the trumpets of Revelation as being essentially the same kind of thing. The trumpets are signals, as the Apostle Paul said, and I quote this often. Let's just look it up for one. Well, it's one of those verses, like, in context, it has nothing to do with prophecy, right? And I will admit that. But context is very important, but it is not always... I'm sorry. I'll share my little doings with you here. Ta-dum. Context is very important, but some things are axiomatic, which means they can be taken out of context and used universally. They're universally true. Is that enough? 39? That's good enough. I know it's in the writings of Paul. It's going to be in Corinthians, I believe. Ooh, there we go. The last trump, yes. 1 Corinthians 14, verse 8. He's talking about tongues and stuff and such. But, verse 8, for if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself to the battle? If you don't know, if the trumpet, and that's one of the arguments I use concerning, I mean, it's not totally out of context. The point is you have to have clear communication. Except you utter by the tongue words easy to be understood, how shall it be known what is spoken? For you shall speak into the air. This is something I try to avoid because I have a naturally broad vocabulary, and I don't use it to try to impress people. I just find it convenient to describe things using words of great magnitude. That was intentional and funny, meant to be a joke. Big words. And I remember when they made, in the last presidential race, they made fun of President Trump because he used the language of the 5th grade. I mean, he used very simplified language. He had a very simplified vocabulary. And they suggested that it had some impact on his intelligence. But you don't have to be smart to use big words. And neither does using big words make you smart. It may mean you have a broad education. It may mean you've been, practicing the use of some, powerful language and such. Let's say powerful, not necessarily. Let's call it deep. Delving deep into the language. But if your goal is to communicate with the maximum number of people, you're not very smart in using big words. Sometimes it's like you get at a loss for words, or you think of words and you're like, I want to use something simpler. But it's not always it's not always easy to simplify everything into everyday language. There is a certain genius in being able to do that, or at least being able to be mindful of it at all times, to be able to keep things simple, keep things clear. And the tunes used to signal with trumpets are often very simple. And one of my problems with a lot of the teachers of prophecy is that they will make the trumpets complicated. Not complicated, I should say, but rather unclear. And I certainly think the signals get more and more complex as we go through, and then at the end, obviously very simple. But there is a certain sort of, isn't that complex? Well, there's a certain, what I would say, if the trumpets are highly symbolic, it would become very difficult to understand them. So when we go through these, I reckon the first 4 trumpets as being highly literal and not symbolic. Now, they could be read as symbolic, and I've heard readings of them as symbolic, and I think that utterly causes them to fail to fulfill their mission. So, with that sort of preamble said about the trumpets, let's continue in the preamble to the actual trumpets, and as we hit on each one, I'll explain further why I think they ought to be interpreted literally and rather than symbolically. And we will definitely talk about some of the symbolic interpretations that I've heard and why I don't agree with them. So he sees the 7 angels which stood before God, and to them were given 7 trumpets. There are 7 angels standing before God. There were a bunch of angels, but now there are 7. There were 7 candlesticks. And 7 stars. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches. I don't know, maybe these are the same angels. And another angel came and stood at the altar, having a golden censer. And it was given to him much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all saints upon the golden altar, which was before the throne. So there's this golden altar. You know, an altar is a place where things are placed. There's an altar. Well, you know, and and that is, you know, altars are symbolic of sacrificial places. And notice, in the altar in heaven, God is not placing victims because the Lamb has been slain and offered for all times, but rather the prayers of the saints come. They are offered on the altar with incense, because for God it becomes sufficient. His grace through the Lord Jesus, part of what God's grace does is it enables so that now, you know, one of the ways, you know, they have made their garments white and washed them in the blood of the Lamb, and you know, people often like, well, how can I draw nearer to God? How can I become a better Christian? How can I improve my life, my behavior? You know, how can I offer my body a living sacrifice? You know, as Paul says, you offer yourself as a sacrifice to God. And I've laid this out many times. It's like you give up often things you might have otherwise had you not chosen to serve God. You know, and there may be sinful things, and maybe things that are mundane and not and sort of neutral. Like some of your time to address the Lord, to speak to Him. You know, and that's what I'm saying. One of those things is prayer. By taking time, you know, because people will tell you, I see it all the time. It's amazing. Even, you know, in the old days, and it's weird to me to speak of my youth as the old days. When a tragedy would happen and people would hold prayer vigils and pray and such and offer prayers for the victims of some tragedy, the media was relatively respectful. In the recent years, though, they are extremely disrespectful at people taking time to pray to God. Because they think, could you do it? And what they've done is they bear their hostility. They're bearing their hatred of God and of those that love God and of those that serve God. They hate us. They hate our God, you know, because they don't believe in God. It is just naked and open. They used to at least have to pay lip service because of the power of Christianity in our culture. At least among, you know, meaning the people in entertainment and stuff, they wouldn't insult such a large segment of the population, because it would create such a backlash. And nowadays, though, they will, and even though the population is still largely Christian, they will willingly insult us because a lot of us don't really care if we get insulted, or are just willing to bear it, or whatever, or just giggle along, and they're being corrupted. Prayer is not something people do that's useless. It's like, because it comes up before God. And I understand not everyone believes in that. That's fine. But you gotta understand that people are taking time. They could, next time we'll all stay home, and we won't pray for you. We'll stay home and do nothing, or maybe pray that God bring the mountains down on top of you all. I mean, if it's prayer is useless, then it's also harmless, is it not? So thousands of Christians praying for the destruction of the evil in our society that's not going to do any harm either, will it? All right. But the idea that God accepts this is all just based on His grace. It's not sufficient for. It is true that, in a sense, from the human perspective, it is not any sort of sufficient sacrifice for any great thing. It is only that God accepts us now because of our faith and service to Him. And the smoke of the incense which came with the prayers of the saints ascended up before God out of the angel's hand. And the angel took the censer and filled it with fire of the altar and cast it to the earth. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings and an earthquake. And the 7 angels which had the 7 trumpets prepared themselves to sound. That's where you really have the connection between the great day of His wrath is come. And what does He do? Remember, under the altar, there were all those that were slain were crying out, "How long till you avenge all the things that happen?" And then the 6th seal, we see all the sun and the moon darkening, and the men on earth realizing that God's wrath is about to come upon them. And then the prayers are mixed with this incense and filled with fire from God's altar, and it is thrown into the earth. Now, the seals are the revelation of a lot of information, but then this voices, thunderings, and lightnings, and an earthquake. This comes up in the 7th seal. It comes up at the 7th trumpet. It comes up at the 7th vial. At the very end of all things, there were lightnings and thunderings and voices and an earthquake. And the trumpet and the vial, it is and great hail. Here it is not mentioned, and it is interesting because the first trumpet is not a great hail, but a hail. And I think it is part of what deceives people. Some sort of remarkable hail from the heavens. It is known to be a sign. And what I say is these first signs, the signals of the trumpets. We're going now to the beginning of the end. The seals revealed things, and the censer sort of thrown into the earth in some ways indicates the commencement of things, of the end. The event bringing forth the events that answer the prayers of all saints. It's the response. Here's the saints have been praying, and God's fire fills the censer, and it is thrown into the earth. And the 7 angels, which have the 7 trumpets, prepare themselves to sound. And the first angel sounded, and there followed hail and fire mingled with blood, and they were cast upon the earth, and the 3rd part of the trees was burnt up, and all green grass was burnt up. Now, to me, this is at least mostly literal. And so I don't have to do a ton of explanation. I will definitely talk about it a bit. But the preterists I forgot exactly which they will say. Ah, yes, in 632. Don't take that date anywhere. In some date, the Visigoths invaded Rome, and they did this and that and the other. And each of these trumpets, they say, is some sort of pagan invasion separated by hundreds of years, or dozens of years, whatever, or even 5 years, whatever. It is some sort of invasion of the Roman Empire. Because the view is all these things had to do with the fall of Rome. Because they take it when it talks about that city, the city that woman shall saw as that city that reigneth over the kings of the earth. They figure that is Rome, the city that reigns over in their time. And certainly, as I've always said, as far as I remember, I've always said this. Just as the city of Babylon, the enemy of Israel, was typical of the ultimate enemy, or the Assyrians were typical of the ultimate enemy, or the Egyptians. The adversarial relationship between God's people and their enemies is a prophetic sort of example of the ultimate confrontation between God's people and their ultimate enemy. And so all the prophets sort of speak to the same central idea and the same culmination in history. So the Roman Empire is another, it also symbolizes that conflict between God's people and their enemy. But, and often the things sent against God, the enemy of God's people, the forces arrayed against it, are often the instruments of God for punishing the enemies of God's people, just as the enemy is often God's instrument for punishing those who are counted among God's people but are either disloyal or unrighteous or unjust, or somehow have violated or neglected the covenant between God and his people. Like when people, just like the 7 churches, you got five that are ready to be taken out of their place, and you got 2 that are stalwart and loyal. And the same thing goes for Christians individually. Some are stalwart and loyal. Others are ready to fall away. They would, under the right circumstances, they would deny the Lord, to save their skin, or perhaps even just to gain a benefit. If you could have $100 million tomorrow, all you have to do is deny your Lord. It's just a simple thing. To earn all that money, just deny your Lord. And the money you can have right now. The Lord, well, what guarantee do you have of that? So, and you think like, well, I wouldn't deny the Lord, and it's easy to say that when the briefcase full of the millions is not sitting before you. The temptation, it's like if you deny that is a temptation. And just because it is a temptation, it doesn't mean you are a necessity. You're not admitting any fault by saying, well, that's tempting. That's tempting. God has given me things that are worth far more than that already. Tangible things. But so it'd be kind of rough. But maybe but there are certainly certainly there is some amount that is tempting for anyone. You know, they say everyone has their price. It doesn't necessarily mean you would give it up, but everyone can be tempted. Even the Lord Jesus was tempted. The devil tried to tempt him at the very least. You know, instead of being crucified, here, just worship me and I'll give you all the kingdoms of the world. It's mine to give. I know that was very tempting to the Lord. But it was certainly a temptation in that he wanted to have. The path he was taking was difficult. He chose the path of suffering for us, as opposed to just taking dominion for himself. So, that Praetor's view, it doesn't do anything for me. Because, yeah, the Romans, but it's like, man, they haven't been a thing for like 1,000 years now. And now this is all just, it doesn't mean anything. This is just history. All prophecy has a future application in some degree, because the lessons don't change. And oftentimes the symbolism passes down. But I have trouble thinking of this as symbolic. Because like if I say, oh, this is the invasion of the you know, or something, I remember the fifth trumpet is the Muslims coming and invading or something, or the is it the Muslims or the Parthians or whatever? Because the locust is similar to the word, or similar sounding, very vaguely sounding similar to the word Arabi, which is locust in Hebrew, but of course in Greek, this is not Hebrew. This is Greek. Book of Revelation. But even so, I don't think the words themselves actually have no connection. It's like they just kind of sound the same. It's like head and had. Oh, they sound similar. You know, heat and greed sound the same, so they have some connection. No, you know, it doesn't. I'm trying to think of something better. French and trench. Wow, it sounds so close. That must be why in World War I there were all those trenches in France. And because correlation is, that proves that there's some sort of connection, just because they kind of have the same. If you can find any coincidence, you can put it together. Not so. Hail and fire mingled with blood, they were cast upon the earth. And the third part of trees was burned up, and all green grass was burned up. You can sorry, I keep bumping my desk. So we could symbolize these into what? People? All flesh is as grass. You know, surely man is as grass. The grass withereth, the flower fadeth, but the word of the Lord endures forever. I think that what we see in the first four trumpets is this hail is, I'm not sure exactly what the cause is. Is it 100% supernatural? Could be. Fire can be, well, I'm already said in the plagues of Egypt, there was a similar thing with hail and fire. And it said the fire ran along the ground and such. Now, I think I always thought that was lightning. Lightning and hail. Because often, because fire from the sky and lightning are not entirely different, but there is a separate word for lightning. And I guess what I think this could be is the remnants of a broken comet. A lot of big pieces. So you would have ice, and it would be not just ice, but rock. What kind of rock? Whatever rock would light up with fire on the way down and come down, so you have flaming icy rocks. And I don't know how exactly, but whatever. When you see flaming ice from the sky, that is a sign. Not only that, they're mingled with blood. And to me that means they kill. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be human, but you get, they strike things, animals, livestock. I don't think it actually, if it actually is already blood on this stuff as it's coming down, it's purely supernatural. I think the blood indicates that it is, as I've said in times past, a killing hail. But not the hail you see in at the end, which is the stones of hail that are described in the 7th trumpet are in the vials described as being like 100 pounds. Each one weighing about a talent. Massive. So while this is dangerous and causes a lot of devastation, burning up the grass, burning up a lot of trees, it is not the same as the second hail seen at the end. So the second angel sounds, and as it were a great mountain burning with fire was cast in the sea. And a third part of the sea became blood, and a third part of the creatures which were in the sea and had life died, and a third part of the ships were destroyed. And so, sorry. Now, first of all, even in my description of the first trumpet and of the second, this does not have to be 100% literal or 100% symbolic. It can be mixed. So the exact numbers and the blood can be symbolic of whatever. Well, it could be symbolic of the uncleanness. Blood in the Old Testament represents that an uncleanness, and there's a lot of wisdom in that. I mean, it's funny to me, when I was a kid, we treated blood like no big deal. Now, like, I coach wrestling, and when there's blood, man, they stop everything. They bring out the sterilization cart. Blood, we got to wipe that up and hit it with some bleach and clean, 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 clean. Blood is unclean. It's interesting to me that we live in a time where we understand this again. That getting the blood of someone on you, or the blood, like you get a little blood in your hand, you should wash it off. Because what if you get it in your mouth or internally, you can pass disease. You can get sick from blood. In the Old Testament, the blood was considered an unclean thing. You were not to, you had to, if you get blood on you, you got to wash it off and cleanse yourself. And so there's a meaning in the idea that there's blood mingled with these things. They're unholy. They're the harbingers of the unholy. They are the signals of the not divine. And because when I look at this, I want to take this mountain literally. Like I said, if you go with the preterist view, it's like, oh, there was an invasion again. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. It would be better. Well, it goes back to what I said. If the trumpet give an uncertain sound, because if this is just like, oh, there was like an invasion and blah, right? And then the first one, it's an invasion. And the third one, it's an invasion. Barbarians. They're all some sort of war. If the trumpet given an uncertain sound, it's like, well, every one of them means the same thing. essentially. All these different symbols symbolize the same thing. Hail and fire, war. A mountain burning with fire, war. The rock fall, the star falls on the waters. It's another war. You know what I mean? It's like, or I haven't talked about this yet, but modern interpreters, and I don't listen to a lot of modern interpreters of the trumpets because I don't really care what they think, to tell you the truth, because I listened to them in the past and I didn't care for what they had to say. Because very often it's like, oh, you know, the first trumpet, that was, you know, I never got this out of Arnold Murray, what he was saying. But I remember what started me down the path of really questioning what Arnold Murray had to say. And he was my original teacher back when I was very young, you know, 25 years ago. And he's a famous TV preacher. And I remember someone says, like, thanks for turning me on to Arnold Murray. Good job. You really, you know, I never would have heard of him until you know, yeah, he's trying to make me feel like bad, like, oh no, someone was listening to me and I mentioned Arnold Murray and they looked him up and they liked him better than me. You know, they think that'll get to him. That'll get under his skin. It doesn't get, the idea of that, he won't get under my skin that way. I don't covet disciples, you know. I covet the truth. And it's like, I don't care if I have one person that listens to me. I do care if I have zero, because if nobody's listening, then I'll go talk to myself. Long ago when I started teaching the Bible, I said, well, as long as there's at least one person that wants to study with me, I'll do it. And so that's why I keep doing it, because there's always been at least one person. And that's all I need. I don't need smart Alex who think they can get under my skin by saying like they... And they're just... It's a lie. I know that. And if it's not a lie, then go be with what you like. Yeah, I know I could sit up here and flatter you all. You know, those of you who listen to me, you are sharp and intelligent, and you know, you guys really know what's going on. You know, it's like, it's making my skin crawl. So, we're here to talk about the word, not to like pass flatteries between each other. You know. Okay. And I never could figure out what Arnold Murray's interpretation, like he would say, one of the things that made me start questioning his teachings was, he said, when I was at the Passover at his church in 1993, that's the wrong year, 1995. Of course, that was the year I was married. We were at the Passover, and he said, he was talking about the fifth trumpet, and he said, that's where we are now. We are in the fifth trumpet. Either it was about to come and pass, or it was, but that meant all four of the first four had sounded. And boy, that, I remember hearing that, and I immediately was like, I really? And I was listening very faithfully to him up till then, and I thought, that was the first time I sort of really questioned, like, does he know what he's talking about? It didn't immediately turn me on him, because it's like, well, everyone makes mistakes, right? You can start excusing people. And certainly that's true. I make mistakes, and mistakes are one thing. But a pattern of bad behavior is another, and that's what it came down to for me. But I'm not going to get off on that too much. If someone's going to say trumpets have already happened, or we're already in the end times, and for me, until these trumpets begin to sound, we're not in the end times. That's why I say we are not living in the end times. Until I see a sign. You know what I mean? Because otherwise, you're sitting in that silence of heaven. And when heaven is silent, don't tell me you know where you are. I get emails from time to time, not always, but from time to time from people who are like, oh, they know, and they've got charts, and they've got maps, and they've got timelines and events plotted out, you know, from history and then parallel to now, and it shows how this is the end. And there was someone in 2016, they were telling me how it was going to end in 2017, and I said, you're a false prophet, and I was right. I never heard from them again. Let's say part of me wants to go look them up, but I don't do that. I don't go chasing people. I don't make that my like I said to her, you came to me. I like that because I don't go to them. It isn't fitting for me to go as to the false prophets, and to as if I need to have their approval, or that they need to somehow. I have to come before them and explain to them no. I do this, and then they can find it. I need to have an explanation of exactly what these things are supposed to be, if not something like this. Something that is a great mountain burning with fire, being into the sea, which to me is a meteor. And it may be related to the things in the first trumpet, the hail and fire, or it could be two things. So if you see the hail and fire coming down, you say, wow, is that the sign? Then when it's followed by, I don't know the time frame, how soon after, it could be months, could be minutes. When it's followed by, and it'd be better if it was some time go by, I think at least maybe weeks or a week or a day or a couple, some sort of delay would be helpful. So that everyone could it could sink in with the hail and fire, and they'd be like, wow, weird. Hail and fire. And things died. And there's massive fires all over wherever. I don't know how much of the earth, I mean, if it hits on a certain continent, it can have, just a storm of icy rocks that are, let's say, big enough not to burn up in the atmosphere completely. See, I don't know how that works. Or maybe something that's big enough that when it hits the atmosphere, it bursts and then creates some sort of atmospheric effect where you have hail and fire. I don't know. Whatever. But, I expect to see some sort of hail and fire combination. Deadly. It causes forest fires and such. And then you see something like that, you think like, wow, that the Bible talked about, but maybe they had seen something like that, right? Or it had been told of at some time and place in history, and so we just got into the Bible, and it's just a coincidence. I don't know, right? Just a coincidence. It's like, so you see one, your eyes open, but then two. I do believe the Great Mountain. It is described as a mountain because it is large. It could be, I guess, a landslide, like a volcano. But volcanoes go off all the time. And the secondary effects of these events, because I think all this stuff that you see into the fourth trumpet, it's like, the sun and the moon are darkened by, everything's by a third, and the darkening of everything. You have these forest fires. You have if you had a mountain-sized, I don't know, whatever size it is to cause the effects seen, it's not going to kill the planet, but it's going to cause the planet to rock to and fro. It's going to really rock the world. Killing all these creatures. I said, does the sea become blood? Well, if it here's the thing. If you see the meteor come down, and the sea doesn't literally become blood, but becomes, to some, at least in some observable thing where it's like, man, there's a lot of blood in the water, or it's unclean or whatever, or if it turns red or whatever. Some way that you could construe like that is that. I do think it is a meteor. A big enough one to touch down in the ocean. So a third of the creatures which were in the sea had life dead. They died. And a third part of the ships were destroyed. Massive probably because of the tsunami and, you know, those ships. Ships at sea survive tsunamis very often, because especially one where the wave is big enough that just kind of goes. Like I said, this is not a planet killer, but it is a devastating impact. We have 5 minutes. See, we're gonna go to the third one next time. But see, when it says in the fourth trumpet, the sun is smitten, and the moon, and the stars, and they're darkened. And I see that as a secondary effect of all the things that are going on in the first 3 trumpets. That when you have, all these burning trees and vegetation, you have smoke going up, and then you have some sort of meteor or asteroid. I think it's a meteor once it comes in the atmosphere. Something that's not big enough to destroy the planet, but big enough to cause massive devastation. So somewhere in that sweet spot, very not, like I said, not something that's not going to just, because like a couple years ago in Chelyabinsk, Russia, there was a meteor that exploded in the sky. It broke a bunch of glass. It was way up in the atmosphere, At some point, it is big enough not to burn up, but not big enough to destroy everything. Like we have small meteors come down. Something that lands and is relatively, could be considered, I'm not saying Mount Everest sized, but maybe Mount Zion sized. I don't know. I remember one time I did a little research on like how big would a meteor have to be to cause certain things, and at what point would they. Mostly people are focused on things that destroy the planet, and so I'm not going to speculate about the exact size. Now you could interpret the mountain as, people say, well, mountains are nations, and that symbolically they do represent nations. Like Rome was built on 7 hills, and Jerusalem also built on a series of hills or mountains. A mountain is a small hill, or a large hill can be considered a mountain. Some people get a little touchy about what defines a hill and a mountain. But they called Zion was Mount Zion, Mount Moriah. And it's not really a particularly rocky, big, like a Rocky Mountain or like that. It's not that important. It can represent nations, but again, I remember a nation is thrown into the sea, which is the people. A nation burning with fire, that symbolizes something, and it's thrown into the people. Like if we're going to go 100% symbolic route and try to go with symbols we understand. And then the creatures in the sea, I guess those are the people. A third of them are destroyed. Well, then what if you go back to chapter 1? To the first trumpet. And the third of the trees is the third of the people. And the grass isn't the people, it's something else. What is it? Their thoughts? We have a third of the people destroyed in the first trumpet, a third of the people destroyed in the second trumpet, a third of the people destroyed in the third trumpet that's coming. So, like I said, or I believe Arnold Murray and some others would say, not destroyed, but deceived. These are deceptions. I remember that. He said that the trumpets were deceptions. I'm like, really? And God also is deceiving us with his trumpets, because he's telling me that the trumpet is going to sound and it's going to be this. It's not going to be that. This is a mysterious, unknown thing. I don't like esoteric interpretations of these trumpets. Certainly not the first 4. I think the first 4 is enough of a warning and a clear sign that if you saw a progression of events like this, you would be aware, as the whole world will be aware, that it's the end of the world. It's the end of. That's what they're gonna think. That's it, man. Men's hearts failing them for what's going on. People are gonna be freaking out. They'll be like, it's the end. And the fifth trumpet is when the hero arrives, the false hero. But he is portrayed there as he is, as an enemy, as the angel of the bottomless pit. The angel of the bottomless pit is Satan. In Hebrew tongue, his name is Abaddon, the destroyer. I mean, you could say it's some other angel, whatever. It's still Satan. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Because Satan means enemy. And it's still our enemy. You know, like, if you, you know, I think there's a lot of interesting, it's not, actually, you know what's funny? One subject I never found very interesting is angelology. And I don't even know if that's a word. But where they talk about, like, the names of different angels. You know, here's Methusiel and, you know, all the names of the fallen angels. And then there's Abaddon, and then there's this other dude, and Samael. I think that's the name I remember. And then there's Lucifer, and, you know, and they get down to the nitty-gritty of who are the, you know, you got your angelic baseball cards, basically. I've never found that at the least interesting, because it doesn't particularly seem like the kind of thing that would come by inspiration of God, quite frankly. All that angelology. I like getting into, like, what's his backstory? What is the backstory of Samael, the third lieutenant colonel in Satan's army? I'm not interested. Not in the least. All right, let's wrap up with what I skipped the entire time. Subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. Click on the little bell so you get notifications. For more study songs, more, oraclesofgod.org. There's my other YouTube page. Questions can be posted. Let's see. Actually, I never even once looked. No, there's just my comment in the live chat. If you have questions, you can send them questions at oraclesofgod.org. I try to check that on a daily basis. I checked it this morning, and there was nothing there. And then you can also leave your questions in the comments section or in the... My camera stopped working. Well, there we go. I guess that means it's time for us to wrap things up. Let's get a... Oh, I can't. Where's my songs? Did I actually close that? Here we go. We'll just take a second here, because I really wanted to put out this song for the outro. And here we go. The second trumpet.
And the second angel sounded, and as it were, a great mountain burning with fire was cast into the sea, and the third part of the sea became blood, and the third part of the creatures which were in the sea